Hey everybody. So I'll introduce myself after the slide, but basically I just want to cover a topic here that I've seen work for a number of years, almost 15, maybe more now. And I'm just gonna step away from specific technologies and just talk about patterns and how to bundle up a foundation that will work on any project. Um, Now we will talk about edge cases, but I'm just saying if you get this right, you'll succeed no matter how small or big the project to work as a team or work as an individual and work with the product owners to build the right thing and build it well. So I'll jump in to who I am before I dig into the particular features of this foundation. So this is proven to work through my time at Pfizer. Before that, I did a lot of work. I had my own shop, PHP, Drupal, and whatnot, and then Ruby on Rails for a bit. But when I got there, there was nothing in place to build out a foundational project stacks, servers, nothing. So it really became a moment of like, hey, we can't use Heroku, we can't use Forge, we need to build something. And the patterns kept repeating. So finally, we had a great foundation that we never had to touch again to a degree. And we could start every new project quickly. And so that's what I'm kind of cover here. And in my experience, as you'll see in this list, is those years at Pfizer, I went from me to a team of many to numerous vendors using the same system because it actually became a requirement for quite a while. It still is when it came time to build novel applications or bespoke applications, things that were more complex than a brochure or website, basically. So I have seen this work. It still works. I've used it now. I've been independent again for 2 or 3 years, and it's been working perfectly fine for all my clients, which is great because it works for the small clients as well, which is what to me is more satisfying. Um, so, all right, let's dig in. So this slide I kind of just covered, but basically this is kind of like us doing two things. We're taking a bunch of Lego bricks and we're defining which ones we need for every project to start. And then we're defining how they should be put together at the start so we can jump in. Some of these Lego bricks won't be needed in every project. You might jump into a project where you're just making a route to handle some request and then send it off somewhere else. And it might not need the UI side, but that's okay. Don't worry about it. It's not interfering with the project, but it got you going quickly into the project because you just could get going. So this foundation, let's start covering the parts to this foundation. And again, I'll cover some edge cases at the end. So the a lot of the pieces are seen here, obviously not everything, and I'm going to go into a lot of these in more detail. But when you start a project, and this happened a lot, the conversation wasn't about should we use Go, should we use Laravel, should we use Python? It has to start, in my opinion, like let's just get started. Everything's in place within an hour. What's the first thing we can deliver to the customer today to prove that we understand the requirements, that we understand what we're building? Now, to put a pause there, um, there are still situations where a traditional waterfall fixed bid is needed, and this can work there, honestly. But I rather not talk about those because I think those aren't the places I want to be. I'm talking about a client or a customer comes to you, they have an idea, they're trying to prove it works, and and you're going to help them build it. And it doesn't matter the size. So in this case, you want to get going quickly and not try to talk about Python or Go or Rust. You want to say to the client, okay, you need a way to do this. Here it is built and deployed to production in that day. And then get their feedback, build, measure, learn. So we get beyond the tech. So in this case, what that takes is the CI, the testing and linting, so everything's consistent, the ability to deploy to production without touching anything. Local development, I'll go into that, and so forth. So we're going to go through this whole list for the most part. And some of these are known patterns, like the secrets and config. That's just a 12-factor app or whatever from many years ago. That website hasn't changed. But if you can get these pieces in place, no matter the tech, Ruby on Rails, Python, with Django, Node, whatever, uh, then you can just walk into a project and then confidence gets started. So let's dig in. So CI/CD is, in my opinion, very key. If it works on your machine, it doesn't matter. It has to work on the place that it's going to. Um, and there are so many solutions nowadays for CI and continuous integration and continuous delivery that if you solve this problem once, you should be done. You don't have to master Terraform, never. Just learn how to use the system you're on, and then get it going and walk away. Because I'm going to talk about ops later. This is not about ops. This is about dev. I think ops gets a lot of attention, and I think in a lot of cases, in all cases, I rather focus on dev. And I think if you do ops right, it's out of the picture on day one, which is nice for me. So in this case, we're saying, hey, get something going for continuing integration. Every time you push code, which should be every hour or two, and I can talk about that later, the Accelerate book, State of DevOps report and whatnot, you can see a feedback cycle of passing linting, passing test. And if you're working with other developers, you get a quicker feedback cycle of, is my code going to merge well? And then the continuous deployment part is key too, because there's so many systems out there and so many open source libraries that you should be able to deploy without any downtime, and it shouldn't take a while and it shouldn't be manual. So most of my projects don't even have staging. Um, I'll talk about feature flags in a moment. I think that's on the list of better me. And basically, you should be able to deploy to production and staging if you want a staging. There's no need to hide deployments from production. I probably won't cover that, but it's not as important in this talk. Um, but I quote the DevOps report here because, again, like frequency of deployment is key. And it's key not only to get you to deploy smaller batches of code, have less problems, but then when you have a problem, you can more quickly pinpoint them and fix them. So a lot of this adds up. Um, so let me jump into the next one. If anyone has any questions, throw them in, and I'm happy to be interrupted. So this is another super important one. I've seen this go wrong. When I was doing some work at Pfizer, one of the big requests was something we needed. We went all in on serverless. I built a whole framework around that using SAM. And when I mean framework, I mean this foundation. But it never felt good locally. It always felt like we were just throwing stuff over the wall to see if it would all come together. The local development experience has to be so good that you're confident that when you push, things are going to work, and that the local developer shouldn't have to um, build up all this crazy environment locally to mimic remote. It should be something that's just taken care of for them via the framework you're using or the work you do to make that possible. The framework I use out of the bat years ago won the battle because it seamlessly integrated locally and then deployed to AWS. And the particular driver system made things like queuing and S3 bucket just seamless. So we didn't think about it. And when we were working locally, we didn't have to mimic those things, but with confidence, we could push and know it would all keep working. So you really want to be sensitive to local development. It has to be a good experience, an easy experience, and one that leaves you with confidence as you're working on things locally. Now, the next thing is that the system you decide on has to be well documented. And again, it's a lot of work if you build your own framework, if you try to build everything on your own. I stood away, I intentionally chose things that had good documentations as a key point. Because when new developers came into the system, I could point them to the documentation, point them to how to do things that were approved, um, and therefore drive consistency and security in many ways. And training became easier. So when you're making these choices, do what you can to find something and things that are well documented. And then if you have to document things, be the glue between all these systems, or just glue being the details that might make it work for you and your company. But try not to go beyond where you're rewriting everything. At that point, it's a lot of work. So again, this particular system you build up, like I'm talking about, should have this. So anyone can come in, whether it's the README in the repository or a website somewhere they can go and get going quickly and have answers. So now back to that, it then comes down to, the team. Um, so a couple of things there. Um, like I said, this should be easy to set up. Very rarely, uh, unless I've messed up the README or done something strange, should it be any different for a teammate to get going than what the documentation says for that framework that I use when I work on projects. So they should be able to get going on their machine, have options on how to set up. And a good framework will enable them to write code, push code, and not interrupt with each other while they're working. Um, I've seen issues with some frameworks where they have a file that it's hard to share because everybody's working in it, maybe a routes file or something, and you have a lot of issues. But I haven't worked in other frameworks in a while, so that might have been just old school problems. But my point is, it shouldn't be a crowded space for the team to work in. And then conventions is key. Um, how you name your models, how you name your routes, how you name so many things. Where do you put things? Those conventions should be something you don't have to figure out along the way because a year or two later, you're going to finally figure it out and you're going to have a lot of stuff to kind of clean up. So team friendly can result in those conventions that help drive the team's language and how they code and how quickly they can just keep moving on things. And that's a big deal. I'm a very unorganized person. I just throw files everywhere. And so this, when I think about how much this has done for me to just not think about that, it helps my creative mind more. And I can not worry about that other part of me that just doesn't exist. Um, so keep that in mind as you go, the team-friendly aspects of what you're trying to do here. And if you're fighting your framework, yeah, something is wrong. I spent years fighting a certain framework I won't name, and I'm so glad I left, but it took me a while to realize it was the framework and not me. So um, this one's a big deal to me. When I started doing all this stuff, people thought I liked ops, and I'm like, no, I like development, but if you don't have good ops in place, then your development experience is going to suck. So I took a lot of time with help. So to build the ops foundation to allow us to do this. So at Pfizer, they went from nothing. They went from, hey, I need a queue, and you would send 10 emails back and forth with someone I didn't know to maybe get a queue to finally we had like basically a cloud formation script that would build everything. And what I'm talking about here is everything, a GitHub repo process and everything that was ready to go with templates. So we really got to that place where we never thought about ops again, and that was the goal. So you want to get to a place where you're not, in my opinion, focusing on ops. When you need to do something with ops, sure, someone needs to dig in and do it and document it so you never have to think about it again. And a couple of things there is, if you're in a big enough company where there's a siloed ops team, that's a risky pattern. The DevOps handbook talks about that. So, it's tricky. You want to get to a place where ops shouldn't be blocking dev or be a full-time job, in my opinion. If you get to that level where it is, then you got to make sure that the ops team is embedded in the dev team so that they really understand the needs of the development cycle. In all my situations, all my applications are built within an hour to just go and be deployed, ready to go with a nice deployment system. And they do come with queues, but queues are cheap. It's just a Redis server that's running, or not even a server, Redis daemon running that can take the jobs. Mail, I use a service for that, but we're always ready to go. Storage is an easy on and off switch for DigitalOcean, Spaces, or AWS S3. But all this stuff is just ready to go, and we just don't need to think about it. WebSockets sometimes Pusher, sometimes a new tech we're using that's just cheaper. Um, and again, if we don't use all of these, it's okay. It's there and ready to go, so we don't have to think about ops at any time in the project until we do, and then we can stop and talk about it and move forward efficiently. And that's the thing. If we try to figure out every edge case, we'll never get anywhere. I'd rather go work with the customer, make sure we're building the right thing, and then we hit the edge cases. I've never painted myself in a corner in so many years that they don't bother me as much. I don't worry about them as much. Um, and again, if you're learning Terraform and you want to be a developer, then stop. Like, just be a developer. Kubernetes, that word got brought up so many times last year, the 2 years before. I was like, and I would ask people, what do you need it for? And they wouldn't explain it well enough. And I'm like, because it's just another tech that was like popular. So yeah, just be careful there. You're not getting stuck in ops. Now, the biggest thing in my technical like decision points was getting good with queuing. Queuing is easy, but at that time I was scared of it, and I used I forget what company it was, and I realized, wow, I could just do this on my own really easily. The technology I use has queuing from the start. Um, like I said, it's a driver-based system, so when I'm working locally, I can use queues, or I can just turn it to array and or sync, and they just act like a queue, but just go in automatic right away. So if you build up this structure, make sure you have a queuing system in place that is on and off. Like if you're working locally, you shouldn't worry about it unless you want to. I do some fun things locally right now to just see an application I'm working on work, but I don't need that to be running locally to make sure this is working. Um, and queuing can be as simple as like, hey, your system needs to send an email reset of a password, and that should go in a queue because a customer shouldn't be waiting for the email to be sent while the page is loading that response or that request. So, but it can be used for even more complex things like batch jobs. Like I have a product right now or a project that you give it a job and all of a sudden it's building up 90 or more batch jobs in a batch, and it's just processing through them slowly to just process all that stuff. And it's really amazing that I can just not think about it. It's easy, it's no longer intimidating. And there's really nothing to it. So you want to get to that point where you and your team are comfortable with queues. And I think I just can't express enough. Once I did this, I never worried about scaling anymore. Um, Many projects I've done require a certain amount of scaling, like they want to upload a 50, 100,000 file row CSV, and the system can just eat that up and put it in the background and chunk through it slowly and do all the other stuff it has to do during that process, including other jobs that come from events and listeners. So it eliminated my fears of scaling, my concerns. So it got me to a place where I could do the little things and the big things quite easily. Um, so this is another one that's a tough one to swallow, I think, is especially maybe because I got older, is you can only do so much. And I enter a lot of projects where people say they know JavaScript or they know Angular, but there's more to all of this and knowing a little bit of something. There's just so much to what we do. And if you're just a front end dev who just does JavaScript, sure, you might be able to know React and Vue and Angular. But I'm talking about when you're really approaching this from someone who's either a solo dev or on a team or a team lead, um, you know, saying no to something is okay. So when people would come up to me when Go was really starting out and being like, I want to do this project in Go, that person who asked me, I liked a lot. He was really good. He delivered. He worked hard. But I'm just like, only if you can build this whole framework around it, can we do it? Because the moment there's just so much to it. The moment he's gone or the moment he has to bring on another member, we need all that stuff in place so we can do that and train them. So there's just a lot more to this. And to know all these things really well is tricky. I wish I could know Ruby on Rails as well as I know what I use day to day. I wish I could know Django as well because all of those seem tempting and amazing. But again, it's a tricky balance between and I just realized this recently. It's like I like to help my customers realize the thing they're thinking about and to build it for them. And even though I rather use different technologies at different times, I want to not get in the way of that. And in the end, that's the day-to-day that I enjoy is building those things for them. So it's good to make a choice. It's good to then master that choice. And of course, you can play with other things. You learn from them, but making investing time in this foundation is key. And when you're talking to other teammates, keeping that in mind because you don't want to. In some ways, it's kind of hard. You're saying no to things, but it can pay off. Um, all right, so basically, there are some edge cases. So, I mean, I've been doing this a lot, and I've done a lot of different projects. one of the goals when I was starting out at Pfizer was to build whatever the department wanted. So we'd come up, we'd go to the departments and they would want this thing and we would build it. And so we were hit with many different situations. Um, and I think I mentioned it earlier, or I thought I did, maybe I didn't. But like one particular project came in that needed a huge amount of traffic at the end of a situation, we'll say at the end of a meeting, so like a vote on the meeting. And I'm like, wow, I don't know how to absorb that much traffic in one in not just traffic, but I had to take a request and in essence only say okay. So I didn't even have to process the request. So it really wasn't that bad. But back then I saw it as bad or hard. Um, so at that time with AWS being what it was with serverless and serverless SAM, we shifted from the main foundational stack to for that project we then built up SAM, AWS's serverless offering, and we built up this exact type of framework around that. So every project started off ready to go like this. Um, and it was a big decision and a big change, and it was an edge case. I think we could have gotten away with just a route, um, but I think at the time I wasn't ready to understand. I just didn't understand that. So in the end, we could have taken the time to learn how to set up an API route, do it right, document it, and repeat it on any other project. So if we ever had another project that did that, we just needed the route to put the job into a queue, and then the system could have processed it in the background. It would have been a lot easier. But my point is, we do hit these edge cases. The thing you don't want to do what is that saying? Basically, if you think too much about it, you're not going to just move forward. So just move forward with what we know. And when you hit the unknowns or these edge cases, then yeah, take them on. Take a moment to think how to do it as simply as possible. You have a good foundation here that most things like, for example, because we had this foundation, all we needed was a route that can handle a ton of traffic and put a job in a queue. Then that edge case fits in nicely to this foundation. And that's something that is another win with this is that you can do that. You can make these edge cases work with this system. So that is it. There are some other bullet points I haven't gone over. I can go back to that, but I can hand it over